What's up guys, Carmine here, back again, once again for another House of the Dragon video, this time for the long-awaited George R.R. Martin review, or should I say, it's less review and more of an open disagreement with showrunner Ryan Condal on some of his choices, but not on the ones you'd think or expected. As of right now, this is making waves in the fandom, specifically because George has never outright disagreed with, at least on this level, with Dave and Dan, here as much as he has with Ryan Condal in this blog post. And he even goes as far as to throw in some snark that Condal might have not have planned any of this out, which I think speaks volumes on George's involvement and their relationship. I think the biggest thing here that's going to get him on HBO's list is that he outright spoils the death of a certain character for Season 3, and don't worry, if you're a non-book reader, I'll be sure to include a warning and a timestamp so you don't get spoiled, so you're fine there, but I did not expect that. As someone who read the book, I knew that was coming, but I did not expect him to spoil that for everybody involved. But at the same time, usually the people reading George's blog posts are book fans anyway, so it's whatever. I'm sure he knows that. But yeah, no, we're going to be talking about all that and more in today's video, and of course, we'll be covering this on the podcast as well, because this warrants its very own episode of the Game of Thrones podcast, so stay tuned for that. But as always, before we begin, please be sure to leave a like and a comment, it helps out a lot, and be sure to subscribe for more videos like this. But for now, let's get into it. So of course, let's read what George wrote. We gotta go through this line by line, and I will be skipping some things here and there because he does repeat himself a couple of times, but let's get into it. Back in July, I promised you some further thoughts about Blood and Cheese and Maelor the Missing, after my commentary in the first two episodes of House of the Dragon Season 2, A Son for a Son and Rhaenyra the Cruel. Those were terrific episodes, well written, well directed, powerfully acted, a great way to kick off the new seasons. Fans and critics alike seem to agree. There was one aspect of the episodes that drew significant criticism, the handling of Blood and Cheese and the death of young Prince Jaehaerys. From the commentary I saw online, opinions were split there. The readers of Fire and Blood found the sequence underwhelming, a disappointment, watered down from what they were expecting. Viewers who have not read the books had no such problems. Most of them found the sequence a real gut punch, tragic, horrifying, nightmarish, etc. Some reported being reduced to tears. I found myself agreeing with both sides. So pretty much George is exactly where I expected him to be, at least on the first half of the season, as I said before. You have people trying hard to push their own weird hatred of this season onto him, but it seems he liked the first half. He praised the first two episodes and even episode 4 in another blog post, and it's quite clear what limitations HBO and the writer's strike had on the pacing issues of the season. But it clearly didn't affect much of the first half as badly as it did the second. A quick recap, HBO basically told the writers to cut down from 10 episodes to 8 shortly after they finished writing the whole season, and they couldn't do much rewrites because of the strikes. As for Blood and Cheese, like I said in my own videos, a majority of the viewer base are casual fans who don't really care to read the books and were overall fine with how that sequence played out, or as fine as you can be with something that gruesome. Basically, it did its job. But George goes on to explain the differences. In my book, Aegon and Helaena have 3 children, not 2. The twins Jaehaerys and Jaehaera are 6 years old. They have a younger brother Maelor, who is 2. When Blood and Cheese break in on Helaena and the kids, they tell her they are debt collectors come to exact revenge for the death of Prince Lucerys, a son for a son. As Helaena has 2 sons, however, they demand that she choose which one should die. She resists and offers her own life instead, but the killers insist it has to be a son. If she does not name one, they will kill all 3 of the children. To save the life of the twins, Helaena names Maelor. But Blood kills the older boy Jaehaerys instead, while Cheese tells little Maelor that his mother wanted him dead. George goes on to highlight the differences between book and show, and then concluding, I still believe the scene in the book is stronger. The readers have the right of that. The 2 killers are crueler in the book. I thought the actors who played the killers in the show were excellent, but the characters are crueler, harder, and more frightening in Fire and Blood. In the show, Blood is a gold cloak. In the books, he is a former gold cloak, stripped of his office for beating a woman to death. Book Blood is the sort of man who might think making a woman choose which of her sons should die is amusing, especially when they double down on the wanton cruelty by murdering the boy she tries to save. Book Cheese is worse too. He does not kick a dog, true, but he does not have a dog, and he's the one that tells Maelor that his mother wants him dead. I would also suggest that Helaena shows more courage, more strength in the book by offering her own life to save her son. Offering a piece of jewelry is just not the same. As I saw it, the Sophie's Choice aspect was the strongest part of the sequence, the darkest, the most visceral. I hated to lose that, and judging from the comments online, most of the fans seem to agree. So, there's 2 things to unpack here. The first is, George reads online comments. Very nice. The second thing is that I know someone is going to try and bring this up, so I want to address it here instead of replying to individual comments. But during earlier parts of the season, I said how this change from Maelor to Jaehaerys was fine because it still resulted in the same thing, the civil war beginning and the brutality shown on either side being front and center. However, I said this because Ryan Condal assured us in an interview that Maelor was still part of the show, and apparently he assured George of that as well. When Ryan Condal first told me what he meant to do ages ago, back in 2022, I argued against it for all those reasons. I did not argue long, or with much heat, however. The change weakened the sequence, I felt, but only a little bit. And Ryan had what seemed to be practical reasons for it. They did not want to deal with casting another child, especially a 2-year-old toddler. Kids that young will inevitably slow down production, and there would be budget implications. By the way, all of that true, something Ryan did highlight. Budget already was an issue in House of the Dragon. It made sense to save money wherever we could. Moreover, Ryan assured me that we would not be losing Prince Maelor, simply postponing him. Queen Helaena could still give birth to him in Season 3, presumably after getting with child late in Season 2. That made sense to me, so I withdrew my objections and acquiesced to the change. I still loved the episode and the blood and cheese sequence overall. Losing the Helena's choice beat did weaken the scene, but not to any great degree. Only the book readers would even notice its absence. Viewers who had never read Fire and Blood would still find the scene heartrending. There's another aspect to removal of the young princeling, however. Sometime between the initial decision to remove Maelor, a big change was made. The prince's birth was no longer just going to be pushed back to Season 3. He was never going to be born at all. The younger son of Aegon and Helaena would never appear. Again, George is basically saying what I've been saying. Casual viewers are a majority of the fan base for House of the Dragon, and I doubt they would care too much over one character not appearing for the sake of being killed off in a brutal way later on. But the main issue here is that Ryan outright lied to George to calm him down, or spoke too soon. In regards to budget, yes, this is something Ryan has discussed before in an interview, something we've covered on this channel, and while I understand his issue with the budget and the technical aspects of having a child actor on set, it's clear that George was starting to realize that the adaptation changes that he hates is coming to the show now. For those of you who don't remember or don't know, George has had a whole blog post a while ago called The Adaptation Tango, where he criticizes the hell out of showrunners who try to adapt things to make it their own. In my opinion, the perfect example of this would be The Witcher on Netflix, but I'm sure you guys could find others as well. Let's continue. Most of you know about the butterfly effect, I assume. Yes, there was a movie with that title a few years back. By the way, great film. Ashton Kutcher was awesome in it. It's a familiar concept in chaos theory as well, but most science fiction fans were first exposed to the idea in Ray Bradbury's classic time travel story, A Sound of Thunder, wherein a time traveler from the present panics and crushes a butterfly while hunting a T-Rex. When he returns to his own time, he discovers that the world has changed in huge and frightening ways. One dead butterfly has rewritten history, the lesson being that change begets change, and even a small and seemingly insignificant alterations to a timeline or a story can have a profound effect on all that follows. Maelor is a 2-year-old toddler in Fire and Blood, but like our butterfly, he has an impact on the story all out of proportion to his size. The readers among you may recall that when it appears that Rhaenyra and her blacks are about to capture King's Landing, Queen Alicent becomes concerned for the safety of Helena's remaining children and takes steps to save them by smuggling them out of the city. The task is given to 2 knights of the Kingsguard. Sir Willis Fell is commanded to deliver Prince Jaehaerys to the Baratheons at Storm's End, while Maelor is given over to Sir Rickard Thorne to be escorted across the Mander to the protection of the Hightower army on its way to King's Landing. Willis Fell delivers Jaehaerys safely to the Baratheons at Storm's End, but Sir Rickard fares less well. He and Maelor get as far as Bitterbridge, where he's revealed as a Kingsguard in a tavern called the Hogshead. Once discovered, Sir Rickard fights bravely to protect his young charge and bring him to safety, but he does not even make it across the bridge before some crossbow brings him down. Prince Maelor is torn from his arms and then, sadly, ripped to pieces by the mob fighting over the boy and the huge reward that Rhaenyra has offered for his capture and return. So real quick, because I wanted to keep going into this, but I get that some casual fans are listening to this right now and are probably saying that they don't want to see another child have a gruesome death, and I do agree with that. When it comes to animal cruelty and even child endangerment, that stuff has always made me very uncomfortable, even reading about it. But I want to quickly highlight something here that George may not realize he's bringing up, and that's Rhaenyra in the show is vastly different than she is in the books, to the point where I doubt she'd even put a reward on Aegon's children. to have them brought to her. The writers have bent over backwards to make Rhaenyra the super special, awesome, good guy protagonist who's really against war and has no major flaws, which is so different than her book counterpart. You could say that Fire and Blood is a history book written by someone who has a bias against Rhaenyra, sure, and that falls in line with Preston's Maester conspiracy, okay, but some of the changes made to the show to keep Rhaenyra's hands clean is a little much. Well, clean of any noble blood. She was cool with having the dragon seeds all killed by dragons in episode 7, but they don't count. Anyways, George continues. Will any of this appear on the show? Maybe, but I don't see how. The butterflies would seem to prohibit it. You could perhaps make Sir Rickard's ward be Jaehaera instead of Maelor, but Jaehaera can't be killed. She has a huge role to play as Aegon's next heir. Could maybe make Maelor a newborn instead of a 2-year-old, but that would scramble up the timeline, which is a bit much of a mess already. I have no idea what Ryan has planned, if he indeed has planned anything, but given Maelor's absence from episode 2, the simplest way to proceed would be just to drop him entirely. Lose the bit where Alicent tries to send the kids to safety, drop Rickard Thorne, which by the way, Rickard Thorne can't be dropped, he is in the show, or send him with Willis Fell so Jaehaerys has 2 guards. From what I know, that seems to be what Ryan is doing here. It's simplest, yes, and may make sense in terms of budgets and shooting schedules, but simpler is not better. The Bitterbridge scene had tension, suspense, action, bloodshed, a bit of heroism, and a lot of tragedy. Rickard Thorne is a tertiary character at best. Most viewers, as opposed to readers, will never know he is gone, since they never knew him at all, but I rather like giving him his brief moment of heroism, a taste of the courage and loyalty of the Kingsguard, regardless of whether they are black or green. So, real quick, Rickard Thorne is in the show. He started taking his helmet off right around the second half of Season 2, when Alicent started going out of King's Landing and doing her own thing. But he's played by Vincent Regan. If you've watched the One Piece live action, he played Garp in that show. But I do expect him to be brutally killed off, since they have named him, and he's not some faceless Kingsguard anymore like Willis Fell. But I'm assuming it's to protect Aegon's daughter, Jaehaera. We'll have to see. Before I continue, however, I will say to those who do not want spoilers to skip to the timestamp on screen now, or use the ones in the description below for Season 3 spoilers. And yes, George apparently has an outline of how Season 3 and 4 are going to go down with all the major changes that they're doing, and he casually wrote in some spoilers for a certain character, so if you don't want to be spoiled by that, skip ahead to the timestamp on screen now, or use the ones in the description. But, to continue on to what George was saying, the butterflies are not done with this yet, however. In the book, when word of Prince Maelor's death and the grisly manner of his passing reaches the Red Keep, that proves to be the thing that drives Queen Helaena to suicide. She could barely stand to look at Maelor knowing that she chose him to die in the Sophie's Choice scene, and now he is dead in truth. Her words have come true. The grief and guilt are too much for her to bear. In Ryan's outline for Season 3, Helaena still kills herself, for no particular reason. There's no fresh horror, no triggering event to overwhelm the fragile young queen, and the final butterfly soon follows thereafter. I gotta say, I'm a little disappointed George didn't take this opportunity to criticize Helena's character direction with this, specifically since they were able to change her character enough in a subtle way initially to give her dragon dreams where she can tell what's going to happen, to full-on giving her powers, where she can project herself into someone's vision, as we saw with the Daemon stuff. And yes, that's exactly what she did, because she's literally wearing the same clothes in the vision and on the balcony at the same time. I know George here is criticizing them leaving out Maelor and the impact on Helaena, but it also relies on that character being faithful to the source material, and now she's a completely different person who could see all events coming to the point where she's emotionally indifferent like Bran was. So it's a different character, and I really wish he would have honed in on this, but whatever, let's continue. Queen Helaena, a sweet and gentle soul, is much beloved by the small folk of King's Landing. Rhaenyra was not, so when rumors began to arise that Helaena did not kill herself, but rather was murdered at Rhaenyra's command, the common folk were quick to believe them. That night of King's Landing rose in bloody riot, I wrote on page 506 of Fire and Blood. It is the beginning of the end for Rhaenyra's rule over the city, ultimately leading to the storming of the Dragon Pit and the rise of the Shepherd's Mob that drives Rhaenyra to flee the city and return to Dragonstone, and her death. Maelor by himself means little. He's a small child, does not have a line of dialogue, does nothing of consequence but die. but where and when and how, that does matter. Losing Maelor weakened the end of the Blood and Cheese sequence, but it also cost us the Bitterbridge scene with all of its horror and heroism. It undercuts a certain someone's suicide, and that in turn sent thousands into the streets and alleys screaming for justice for their murdered queen. None of that is essential, I suppose, but all of it does serve a purpose. It all helps tie the story together, so one thing follows another in a logical and convincing manner. So, I'm not trying to run defense for Ryan Condal here, but I will say that a lot of this can still happen. In a sense, Thorin could still take Jaehaera, the remaining child, to the Reach. They get discovered, and he dies trying to get her to safety. Maybe another Kingsguard brings Jaehaera to someplace safe, but with no news of her safety, it could still cause these events to play out and the eventual riots. That could still go down, but I get where George is coming from in his frustration here, how it's a needless change done due to budget and casting issues, but I have to wonder if he ever tried to work out some of these later story details with Ryan to make it fit a bit better and closer to the source material, to make do with what they have. But he ends the blog post by saying, "What will we offer the fans instead once we've killed these butterflies? I have no idea. I do not recall that Ryan and I ever discussed this back when he first told me they were pushing back on Aegon's second son. Maelor himself is not essential, but if losing him means we also lose Bitterbridge, that person's suicide, the riots, and, well, that's a considerable loss." George closes out with the most damning part of the blog by saying, "And there are larger, more toxic butterflies to come if House of the Dragon goes ahead with some of the changes being contemplated for Season 3 and 4. So, I think I speak for a lot of people when I say I was expecting more of an episode-by-episode analysis on what he liked and what he didn't like, and what we got here was something. I know some people who didn't like Season 2 are going to try to claim some weird type of victory over this and be very hateful and all that, and honestly, I don't think anybody wins here. I hate that I have to keep reminding people of this, even though George said it in this very same blog post that I just read, and others, but he clearly didn't hate Season 2. The problem he's having is that there are needless and unnecessary changes made throughout the show that just don't make sense for the characters or the story going forward. I get that, and I get why he focused on the Maelor change so much, even the dragon behavior in a previous blog post, but I wish he was a bit more straightforward about other changes instead of contradicting himself here, because he did. For example, Helaena. He mentions here how the change with Maelor removes some of the stuff that happens with her regarding Blood and Cheese, and even later on, but when the first episode came out, he praised the way they changed the character. Helaena in the books is massively different than she is in the show, but he was okay with that. But in order for Helaena to react the way he wanted her to, and for that outcome to come about in the same way, they would have had to make her book accurate, which they didn't, and he said he was fine with it. So, which is it? And to be fair, I know some people are going to say, didn't you pay attention? He hated all the changes. Well, no, he doesn't, because most of what happens in episode 2 is completely original and changes quite a lot of things, and he loved that. So, yeah. Also, and let's be honest for a minute here, the stuff with Maelor and Helaena are the last things I would list as problems with Season 2. Him not mentioning them butchering Alicent, the unnecessary Rhaenyra meetings, Daemon's visions, Alice being a completely different person entirely, the inclusion of blood ravens, the green men, amongst other random-ass things they threw in there. There was so much change here in Season 2, and to focus on the one thing that seems, I don't know, like so little in comparison to all this other stuff. Again, before someone says, well, it's clear that he's not cool with it. No, as I just said, he's fine with some of the changes and not fine with others. So I would have liked for him to spend more time telling us what he didn't like specifically, instead of telling us the stuff we already know, because most of us know what removing Maelor means. If anything, the blog post seemed like an excuse to trash Ryan Condal and the writers' garbage ideas they had for some of the characters. Again, I'm fine with that, but I wanted more detail. That being said, I am mixed on this blog post. On one hand, I love that George is being honest and real with us and telling us how he feels, but on the other, if he was going to go scorched earth, then I'd rather that blog post be longer and more damning. Go nuclear. As of recording this, the blog post and the website itself has been taken down. Possibly HBO or Condal contacted him and they exchanged some words, so we'll have to see what goes down. But for now, I'd love to know what you guys thought of this, and I'll pass the question on to you. Was George in the right for putting this out and criticizing the showrunners, or was this just unprofessional of him? Leave your thoughts down below, because I will feature them in the next video, because I do want to follow up on what the fandom thinks about all this. Because I checked on social media, subreddits, forums, all this other stuff, and you guys have mixed opinions about this, and I really like that, because the conversation is just there, and I've always enjoyed that. So, as always, thank you so much for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, all that good stuff. I'll see you next time. Have a good one.